Hello everyone, this is FideMaster Viktor Neustroev. Thank you for joining our workshop today. Today we are going to work on such a very helpful topic for all chess players as opening files. So we are going to discuss when we should open files and what should we do before and why opening files may be helpful for your position and may allow you to play for a win. Okay, so let's wait for more students to join our workshop. If there is anything that you want to discuss before we continue with the main topic, you are welcome. If there are anybody who is new to this workshop, who attends this workshop for the first time, because I do it regularly every Sunday, but if you attend it for the first time, please let me know. And if so, introduce yourself a little. For example, which country you are from and what's your ELO. It can be either FIDE rating or just online rating on chess.com or Lichess. Again, if you have any questions, you can either type them in the chat or just unmute your microphone and ask me. Again, also, when I'm going to ask you about this certain position and the move that I ask you to find or a plan, you can unmute yourself and say it, or, which I think is better because it allows other students to think too, is typing in the chat in Zoom. Okay, so I'm reading both comments. We are recording this event, and there is also a stream on YouTube. So that's why I'm reading comments on both on YouTube and here in Zoom, of course. Okay, let's start. And what I would like you to know. So opening the files is a very important strategic idea, strategic approach, I would say. And this is quite common for many types of the position. How this happens, how do we usually open the file? Well, in almost all cases, we do a pawn exchange and open the file to be able to activate our pieces. Sometimes, instead of just offering a pawn trade and then do this exchange, we trade pieces and double our pawns. For example, if let's say there was a piece captured on b3, either with a knight or so, then we open the a file like that. Or maybe on g3, there is a bishop trade we take with the f pawn. It allows us to open the f file then. This is how we can do it. What else? What are our goals? Our main goals is to use our long reach pieces, which are bishops and rooks, because opening the files allows you to start a direct confrontation. And if your pieces are better prepared for that, for example, you already have rooks on that file, you have better pieces placement, they coordinate among each other better, so you are likely to take advantage of opening the file. We are going to invade the enemy camp through this file, or at least attack the enemy weaknesses, or just tie down enemy pieces to the weakness. For example, if in this position we open the f file, the f7 will be the object of the attack, and that will definitely tie enemy pieces down to it. What do you think? Well, what should be these features of the position which may signal us that we should open the file? You can either suggest it to this concrete position, so you can tell me which file we should open here and based on what you decided so, or just overally. Okay, so there is a question on YouTube. It's okay to open files at any time if our pieces are ready. Well, if our pieces are ready and the enemy pieces are not, yes, that's fine. Well, you can do so. So here Carlos suggests to open the F file. Fine. How exactly do you want to open the F file here? Can you please specify? Okay, so Carlos suggests to do this, then play knight h2, and then consider doing f4. Well, that's right. That's right. You don't really have to take on g7 right away. You can start with knight h2, but of course, before you play f4, you have to trade first. Otherwise, you just lose your bishop. Right now, if they capture there, it's still favorable for you because your queen invades the enemy camp. So knight h2 was played. Well, this was actually the Rosalimo variation of Sicilian defense. The bishop went to b5 in Sicilian, then the bishop took on c6, and this is how they doubled their pawns. And the e-pawn went to e5, which is quite common to cover these critical squares. And what's then? Well, so black has a bishop pair, but now we managed to trade one of the bishops, so it's completely fine. For white, it's not a big issue. Now we are opening the F file. They continued with rook d8 to have some counterplay with c4. Bishop takes g7, king takes g7, and now f4 was played. What do you think black should do? Should they open? Should they take on f4 and should they open the position? Or maybe they consider they may continue with c4, let's say. Okay, so f6 is suggested by Josie, and Michael suggests c4. Okay, and fine. So not opening the position is better than opening the position. Okay, fine, I got the point. But this time it seems that black is forced. Black is forced to take, because if they play c4, what do they do after f5? Because knight g4 and queen h6 is coming, and then f6 becomes already a problem. So now f6 is too late, because... okay, so probably this is where you can continue with this move. Okay, fine. Let me do it in a better way. Let me take on g6 first. And then continue with this move, threatening my queen going there. There will be enough pressure on f6. Seems to be like a winning position. What I need to do is just to double. And the black's biggest problem is that they cannot take our knight with a bishop, because in order to do it, they have to make a knight move. But the knight move means there is no defenders of the f6 pawn then. So because of this knight g4 feature, so for example, if you decided to retreat to e1, they could do almost anything you want. But with knight h2 and then g4, they'd better open the position rather than just keeping it closed. Okay, now let's talk about what Zemfir suggested. Rook d8. How does rook d8 works? I mean, rook d8, was a mistake according to Zemfir, and instead f5 should be played. I don't think it's a good idea, actually. Why? Well, let's say take king takes probably, pawn takes, and then rook e1, and then I'm going to play this. And how do you defend e5? Even if you move the queen, still f5 looks like a possible move. I'm just not sure if I should play it right away. Maybe this should be played first. Okay, maybe the queen went to a wrong position, maybe here, but then f5, f4 right away. And if you trade, you have a weakness there. Knight g4 is coming also. No, they cannot play f5. It will be a mistake. Playing f6 maybe is better. Queen g7 gains a tempo. So you mean this? Well, it doesn't fully gain a tempo. Let me play f4 right away. And after this move, I can probably take with a queen, and the bishop is still blocked. So my goal is to do rook f3, rook g3. I think most likely f5 will be the biggest problem of your position, while I can bring the knight back. So playing f5 is actually a mistake. White can trade and then isolate the pawn by trading the e-pawn. So it doesn't allow you to solve the problem. So doing f6. Well, doing f6 again seems to be similar. So what we can do? We can continue with f5, but then g5. Maybe it's not bad. So let's do f5, g5. h4, h6. And this seems to be winning. So this is the plan. The knight comes to h5, the other knight comes to g4, and f6 is likely to be lost soon. So, okay. Actually, they have to take. Not taking means that white plays f5 and then threatens to continue the attack with this move and with f6. That's why they have to take. But now they have to defend their weakness on f7. Knight e5 seems like a reasonable move. But what do you think you should do? Well, more rooks on the f-file for sure. But even if you bring more rooks, how do you get rid of this knight on e5? You don't. And because you cannot, you have to play knight f3. And if you play knight f3 and they take on f3, then the rook goes to f3 and it's easier for you to double. So knight f3, definitely removing this knight is our main plan. Well, this move would be okay. But after knight takes e5, they have to capture with a pawn and open the f-file fully. Because if they take with a queen, you can trade queens and then simply win a pawn. So c5 is lost. If c4, there is knight b6. That's why pawn takes. So pawn takes, we must move the queen. But this seems like a winning position. Oh, well, not winning, much better. Just rook f3, rook here. Improve the knight and threaten there. They have to defend e5 and c5 with their queen. And after c4, you can even consider d takes c4 to win a pawn. The game continued with knight f3, rook f3, and they made a mistake. They played b5, trying to develop some initiative, but in fact it was a tempo loss. Instead, it was already time for bishop e6, because queen e5 check doesn't do much, then the queen retreats. b5 actually did make sense. For example, in this position, when white added enough pressure on f7, what do you think was the best move for black? Okay, so rook a7, that's right. How does this move work? Just defend on f7 with a rook, so it's not possible to take. Maybe it's possible to continue then queen g3 to threaten to take here and exchange two rooks for queen and pawn, but then the queen invades the enemy camp. So now bishop e6, but after knight e2, white is still winning. So the pawn is, of course, poisoned. The knight goes to f4, and then probably there is invasion. Maybe queen e5 first, and then the knight goes to f4. Or maybe the knight goes to f4 and then to h5. So you see, here white has a multiple plans. In the game, it was played bishop e6 instead. So even rook a7 wasn't played. Black was under the pressure, and what did he miss? How would you continue for white now? Okay, so there is queen e5 suggestion. Anything else? Okay, thanks. Alan suggested h4, h5, which is a possible plan too, and we would play it for sure if e5 didn't work. So e5 knight e4 looks like a plan too. The game continued with queen e5. Why? Because you just easily win material. f6 is not playable. King g8, yes, but after rook f7, it's time to resign because it is checkmate. And after bishop takes, it's queen takes queen. So this is how the game ended. Of course, we understand that if rook a7, the game would continue, but the position still looks very unpleasant. With knight f4, knight h5, even with just queen e5, knight takes e6 then. Queen e5, knight g3 works too. I don't think that black survived here. Well, probably the game would end maybe in 15 moves. There is also the control over this square, f6. Fine, this is how the game ended. Let's do a conclusion. What did happen here? How did white realize that it's time to open the f file? So if, let's say, the bishop was there, then doing f4 would only activate the enemy bishop. But because the bishops are about to be exchanged, then f4 makes sense, and the f7 pawn becomes a backward pawn on the open file, and advancing this pawn would be too risky, even to f6, because f6 is an easy target, and because even f5 can be played. Okay. Then can you please specify how exactly you want to open the D file? You mean D4 supported by C3, so the knight has to move like that. I wouldn't say it's too slow, but I would say what it allows you to do, because you open the position on the D file, but are your pieces better prepared? Because just one rook move already makes your whole strategy suspicious, and you have to make a queen move to avoid problems and maybe some tactical strikes. Maybe even just, well, when d4 is played, knight e5 can be played. Well, we can try to simulate it. Let's say rook d8, you play c3. Well, e4 is also vulnerable. So if you want to do this, you have to play knight g3 first, but then you don't have enough attackers of the d4 to support this pawn move. Now, let's say they play knight f8. This is one of the common plans that I know in Rossolimo. So d4, I don't, okay, take, then d4. So c takes, pawn takes, knight takes, bishop e6 or knight e6? Well, c5 already. c5, yeah. c5 wins a piece, so there is even no need. So playing d4 requires you to bring the queen away. So, for example, you have to trade, let's say, then play queen e3, then only play knight e2. So let's say they, for example, stick to the same strategy. c3, knight goes to e6, for example. Oh, no, this is a blunder. There is a pawn hanging. So, okay, f6, it can be f6. Take, this knight takes, and let's say bishop e6. So why this position is better for white? Because it looks quite solid. They play this move, and after knight e6, I don't see weaknesses in the black's position. What you can try to do is probably to exploit your pawn majority. But doing it means that you have to play this move. You can try e5, but again, I doubt that it works. So this makes the position too open and allows them to get rid of the weakness on c4. We should open the position, thus we can take advantage of our pieces coordination, but not let our opponent to coordinate their pieces well. So if we open the f file but keep the d file closed, we don't open the position much. There is still a strong pawn on e4 that they cannot get rid of, and because of that, the position is only open on that side of the board where we need it. We have the rook here, we can double the rooks, and they cannot play f5. Well, I'm talking about, well, let's say this position. This is where f5 doesn't work well, because take, and f4. And if f5 take rook takes, I think it's rook e1, and this is a weakness. So the conclusion is that opening the f file is better than opening the d file, because by opening the f file, we can coordinate our pieces and take advantage of that by attacking the f7. The f7 is the object of the attack. It's a backward pawn. If we open the d file, we only make the position more open and let our opponent get rid of the weakness on c5. But we don't really get anything. So if, for example, the position was full of pieces, and let's say we had a dark squared bishop here, and then doing d4 and trying to activate your bishop, maybe with a queen, and with your knight on g4, you can do the attack through the center. Maybe then doing d4 would make sense. Here, you just open the position and nothing more. You let your opponent to get his pieces coordinated too. Okay, and once you usually attack the pawn and okay, there is a sentence by Mark. I heard once you usually attack the pawn in front of your topmost opponent pawn in your pawn chain. Mark, are you talking about attacking the base of the pawn chain? Yeah, good comment by Joshi. Not moving the d pawn allows us to preserve the pawn structure and make it still solid. Alan says that double pawns, these double pawns, allow black getting a better control over the center. So yeah. So because they control the d4 square with their rook, then playing d4 takes a lot of resources from us. And that's why it's better to focus on the kingside plate, but keep the center more stable. Fine, let's continue. So here we decided to open with the f because this is how we could coordinate our pieces, take advantage of the enemy weaknesses such as f6 and h6, as well as, maybe the most important thing, attack the f7, the backward pawn. Let's continue with our next example. So black, it's black to move. Black has some advantage. They have a strong knight on e4. Their pawn structure is better because these pawns are doubled, and well, they can actually undouble if it was their move with... No, they cannot because d4 is hanging. It's not an easy task. The queen is here. So what do you think black should be doing in this position? What is the black's plan? There is already one file open, but with a knight you close it, so white cannot operate with their rooks through the e file. Carla suggests open the G file. Well, it's very optimistic. Well, the moves candidates here are rook e8 and the 5, of course. But Carlos, can you please specify how exactly you want to open the G file? Because opening the G file may work, but it's definitely not the first part of our plan. Then suggest opening the B file with A5, B5, and B4. And then you can take advantage of, well, this is how with b4 you can keep this pawn structure, I mean these pawns weak, a2 and c2. The problem of this strategy is that even if you do so, they can just play a3, and after b4 they take, trade rooks, improve their pawn structure if they have d4 protected with something else. So I think that playing on the queen side is the last thing that black should do. However, doing this is definitely favorable, for sure, with no doubt. And if only we give to tempi for black for free, they would play knight a5 and knight c4. Maybe b6, to not let them to attack our pawn on b7 is also a plan. But again, we can play b6 only once they attack it. Opening the F file is suggested, and Carlos suggests to open the G file. Okay, well, actually, Carlos, it does make sense. Opening the G file makes sense, but you should be very accurate with it. From this exact position, it's not clear that you can do it, but if they stop your activity with pawn to f4, then opening the G file and attacking through the G file can be your plan. So let me show you what happened. f5 for sure. Well, why f5? First of all, you can play on the king side with g5, g4. It well, right now it doesn't work, but it may open the f file for you. But also the idea of this move is to support this knight, as well as to prevent the enemy knight coming to g4. Then, is there anything you wanted to mention here? Okay, fine, let's continue. Queen d3, they vacate this square for the knight. And knight a5. Knight comes to c4, and this knight cannot be chased away, but at the same time controls a lot of squares in the enemy territory. This is where white made a positional mistake. What they should do? On the one hand, they can bring the knight on f3, but this knight is quite restricted after knight c4. You cover this square, and only if they do this, you can continue with g5. And then g4. What else? Well, this move doesn't make much sense. It seems that they win a pawn, but if then you continue with, let's say, this move, you threaten to trap the queen with c6. So they would probably have to move, well, c4, c6 then, but maybe queen escapes. But if queen escapes, you win this pawn and then this pawn. Or you win with your queen. So that's why queen b5 doesn't work so well, because after b6 and c6, the enemy queen has to go back. And b6 is a part of our plan. They'd better play f3, driving our knight away. That would be the best strategy. Then doing knight c4 makes still a lot of sense. We would definitely play it, but now the position becomes tough, and well, what they can do? Rook f2, knight f1, trying to improve the knight position. Or maybe they can consider doing g4 and, well, doing g4 when the rooks are connected. But the problem with g4 is that if they decided to take with the f-pawn, e4 becomes weak, and after knight e4, the black's position looks really good. Okay, so f4 was played. This is a strategic mistake. With this move, white wants to mechanically stop the pawn march that black initiates on the king side. However, the bishop becomes more passive. So, for example, in case of knight f3, bishop f4 scenario, it was at least possible to play bishop f5, and this bishop would be quite an annoying piece. And if the knight takes it, the other knight goes to e5, which is also fine for white. But when they play f4, well, for sure the knight goes to e5, but this bishop becomes really a bad bishop. And this knight is invulnerable. And after f4, you may consider that opening the g file allows you to play for a win. Yes, exactly. This is what Alan suggested. f4 gives black the hook to open the g file. True. This is where you should decide to play g5, because once you are better prepared, there will be an attack on the enemy king. So the game continued with queen d7. Maybe not the most helpful move. Knight f3 and queen c6, attacking there. That was the plan of this queen's transfer. The knight goes to e5. What's your opinion? Can we win a pawn right away? No. Yes, thank you. Yes, exactly. So we cannot, because there is a skewer at the end, and even if we make an intermediate check, two pieces are hanging simultaneously. We may get several pawns, but these several pawns do not compensate a knight loss. So this is what black realized, and instead of taking on c3, he played queen back to e6. Rook b1, b6, of course, because knight c4 is the plan, and king h2. Okay, this is where I want you to think about the move. What do you think black should do right now? We have to decide. Are we ready for g5? Do we have to play rook g8 here maybe? Or some sort of other preparation? Why I'm saying about preparation? Because I don't see any active strategy for white in this position. That's why I'm sure that we can do a slower plan. Double rooks on the g file and then g5. Okay, this was a suggestion by Carlos. So while rook here, well, it's possible. Zamfir suggests to activate pieces, knight c4, and bring the rook to from a8. Zamfir, where would you like to move the rook from a8? What do you think is the best position for this rook? To the G file. So the A rook goes to the G file. At least this is what we figured out. And Isabella suggests to play knight c4 and c5. Well, knight c4, yes, but c5 opens the position too much. Do you really want it? Because you can instead initiate the attack on the enemy king through the G file. And in order to achieve it, we can bring the rook to the G file. So let's take a look at the next moves, and I'm sure you will understand the overall picture of the position. So knight c4 was played. Now what? The only move that we have to calculate here is knight takes c4. But once we see it, we can calculate. We can just figure out that actually it's okay. Why is it okay? Well, we double the pawns, but this is not a big issue. c3 is still vulnerable. How do they attack this knight? They cannot, and this knight ties enemy pieces down to the protection of c3. Also, we have the d5 square that we can use for our queen, and if we then open the g file, there will be some discovered attack. So, and where does this bishop go? e3, a3, but what's the purpose? So exchanging the knight favors us. The game continued with bishop e3. They just trying to get the bishop closer to the place of action, but that was actually a useless move. Now g5. The concept of this move is that if, for example, this move is played, then you can first capture on e5, weakening the pawn structure. Queen takes e5 means bishop f4, so we avoid it. We take there first, and then queen e5 is played at the very next move, which is win the pawn with a check. Because how do they defend it? Bishop or queen d4 is met with c5, for example. They lose a pawn, and there is also the g3 square available. And this time you can play king g6 and continue the attack through the h file. So that's why they cannot take it. What they did is g3. And now let's do what Zamfir suggested us to do. One rook goes to f6 and the other rook goes to g8. Bishop c1 was played. So here you can actually do almost anything you want. What do you think? Let's come up with a plan. There are several things you can do. Okay, so g takes allows them to open the bishop. I don't think it's a good idea. Maybe taking on e5 and then playing rook g6 and then g takes. Still they open the bishop. b5 and c6 is a plan. Well, b5 maybe to reinforce the position of the knight. c5. Not clear what for. So what c5 allows you to do? Do you want to capture on e5 and then push c4 with the tempo? Well, if so, then maybe. It drops the knight. How does it drop the knight? I don't think d5 is playable here. No, well, the pawn won't move further. Even just this is sufficient. Then the pawn is lost. So we should make such a move with our knight, with our queen, right? Or what? So, okay, queen a8, a4, and a5. Sounds like a plan. What I don't want you to do is to blunder. Aha, so queen e8, yeah, queen e8 blunders the pawn on c4. That's true. That's why the move that was played was b5 first. What else you should do? Well, you could also try to continue your attack on the king side, but this time it's not so clear how exactly you do it. Because this means that they can activate the bishop. If you play g4, maybe they can take, but just h4 closes the position forever. The most common strategy in such a case is h4, h5, but it looks like it fails this time too because of f takes g5 and their bishop becomes active. And because of that, we transfer the queen to the other side and attack the pawn on a2. So knight f3 was played. Well, this time knight f3 was also kind of inaccuracy. It allows us to play g4. But if not, our plan will be this and this. So g4, h takes g4. What, pawn takes or rook takes? What is better? Rook takes, right? Yeah, for sure. The rook should take because this is how we attack the backward pawn and we keep our position closed, as well as we still have a pawn which supports our knight on a4, as well as the rook on g4. So knight g1, rook goes there. Queen g8. So 3 attackers, the knight comes. This is where black applied the principle of 2 weaknesses. g3 is one weakness, and the second weakness is a2. That's why first black tries to succeed with the attack. So king g2, h4. Rook h1 was played. Now he does rook h6. tying all pieces to the defense of g3. So because h takes g3 is already a threat. Rook takes h3. Queen g6. This move is played not to protect here, not to add pressure on the king side. This move is played with the idea to transfer the queen to the queen side. So the game continued with bishop e3 because white is running out of moves. So now queen e6. So the position was stuck on the king side. All pieces were tied down to the defense of g3, and simply you can capture the pawn because like defending the pawn with this move is a disaster. You can just take on g3. I think with a knight is fine. With a pawn is still okay, but I want to take with the knight because I already have the rook. So this is completely winning. The game continued with bishop f2. They are trying to bring more defenders, but this means that they lose there. Now bishop e1 to close the position or to not allow, I don't know, just maybe they don't have any moves. And this is a winning position only because of this simple plan, which white cannot avoid. The a-pawn moves. And because the position is closed on other sides of the board, white couldn't do anything. Okay, yeah, thanks for your suggestion. The a-pawn march was the key. Let's go back to this beginning and try to make a conclusion. What did happen here? So f5 was played, and with f5, black shows that they want to support the knight as well as stop this knight and to continue playing on the king side. At the same time, this plan seems to be reasonable. Once white makes a mistake, then black decides to open the position with g5 and attack on the g file, making a weakness either on g2 or on g3. It happened. So they improved their position and finally they did it. Now they brought their pieces to the king's side to tie the white's pieces to the weakness on g3. And after that, the queen goes to a6. So all pieces are stuck to g3. The queen goes to a6. They lose the pawn on a2. And well, once you capture this second weakness, you can successfully promote the a-pawn. That was the main strategy. So opening the g file didn't provide us with a decisive attack. It allowed us to attack one weakness and apply a principle of two weaknesses. How did we decide that we can play g5 and open the position there? Well, it was quite clear after the f4 move that such a plan becomes possible, because if they capture, we take with a pawn and we control many squares here, not allowing them to coordinate pieces. The king may later move to g6 to cement the position, and there is not much they can do. We can also attack a weakness on c3. So if this plan would fail, no, if this plan failed because of f takes g5, we would focus on c3. Fine. Let's continue. The game between Akiba Rubinstein and Alexander Alekin. Black to move. No, it's white to move. It's white to move, and what do we have? The pawn on e4. This is actually Dutch. It's Dutch defense, so I don't see any active plan for white. And what I would do in this position, I would either play f3 or f4. Let's decide which move is better, f3 or f4. Okay, f3, f3. Well, when you suggest, can you please do kind of explanation so that I can understand what you based your decision on? Okay, f3 to do e4 then. This is a good point. Don't want the pawn to control my side. Okay, so f3 to get rid of this pawn. If e takes, bishop takes, and then you can play e4, get a better pawn structure, and your pieces are more active for sure. Maybe they gonna play d5, but that blocks the bishop, so d5 we would try to transfer our knight on e5 then. And it's not bad. But, okay, f3. f3 is a better move. However, in case of f3, it's queen g5. And now you cannot protect the pawn, so you have to play f4, and it still closes the position. Queen e7 and queen e1. And this is where white is fine. Why doing f4 is already inaccuracy? Who can tell me? It looks like the same position. Well, in the previous example, one queen was on e7, the other queen was on e1. But this time, the queens are on d8 and d1. So what's the difference? The e3 pawn is weaker. This is true. Okay, so Liliana suggests to play g5. This is the difference. Because in that position, after f3, queen g5, f4, queen e7, and queen e1, well, white is better prepared for g5. They can already bring the queen here. And that would cause some unpleasant consequences. But f4 was played right away. And then g5 looks good. There is no queen. So what did they play? They played knight c4. Knight e7 is a more flexible move. I don't know why Alexander Alekhine didn't play it. Maybe he was afraid of this or what. I don't think it's the biggest issue here. Just this move, attacking e3, attacking g5. So, of course, e3 is not hanging at the moment, but let's say they do h4. How can we play in this position? It weakens our king, but the files are closed. That's why they don't attack it directly. And in this position, according to what I see, maybe rook c8 is... No, rook c8, knight d6. No, maybe knight d6 is okay. So which move to play? Let's play b5. It just requires a little more calculation. So knight takes, knight takes, knight b2, knight b7. No, okay, queen b6 then. Queen b6, and then we can take there, and this knight does escape. Okay, so first they have to make a queen move. For example, queen c1. Okay. So it's still extra exchange, because if this knight escapes, then our knight escapes too, because we attack the knight, the bishop, and we can also continue with f4 then. So black has extra exchange. That tells us that after knight d5 and b5, they cannot play knight d6. They lose material there. That's why after knight d5, they probably would protect this pawn, but lose the one on g5, which is also fine for us. So knight e7, the game would continue with queen e1, let's say bishop a6, f takes g5, and knight d5, threatening to take on g5. And if this move, I think that's rook c8 is okay. Well, rook c8 or b5, what is better? Well, probably b5 this time is better. b5, knight d6, and knight e3. There is no good move to create a discovered attack, because there is knight c2. Okay, so let's go back. Knight c4 was played. Alekhine decided just to reinforce his pawn center. He plays d5. The knight goes to e5. Knight takes knight. The d pawn takes. Because capturing with the f pawn would allow black later to continue with f4 and get the g file open. I'm not saying f4 right away, but maybe this, the rook move, maybe rook here, queen moves, the other rook goes there, and then f4. That's why d takes e5. Also, this square is vacated for the queen or a rook maybe. King goes to h8. Opening the g file and attacking there can be a plan. a4, rook g8. White would better, already prepared for that. Okay, so Alan says taking with the f pawn is dangerous. As Russian said, don't touch the pawns when you are weak. Well, I didn't know about such a rule, to be honest, and I don't know who said it first. But no, it does make sense to play with the f pawn, especially when your position is when your king is under attack. Using the f pawn makes sense because this is how you expand space and you allow your pieces to protect the g2, the object of the attack, with your major pieces, like with a queen, with a rook, for example. So that's why using the f pawn can be quite helpful, even if you are under attack. Fine. What happens then? Well, doing king h2. Yeah, taking on f4. Okay, so g takes f4, e takes f4, and it's hard to find an attack because queen h4 is faced with queen e1. That's why I think that at the moment we are not prepared for this. Okay, well, 3Ram says that g5 weakens the king. I actually don't agree with you. The g5 weakens the black king. I actually don't agree with you. Can you please specify it? Because typically pawn moves do expose the king and your opponent can take advantage of that. But you shouldn't be afraid of ghosts. You should see how exactly he may take advantage of your king's weakness. If, let's say, he brought his knight on f6 or his bishop on f6 or he opened the diagonal for his dark squared bishop, then for sure, yes, g5 weakens the king's position. As for this position, they don't have a knight, even if they had, how to bring such a knight to f6, how to open the diagonal. Even if they had a dark squared bishop, it's impossible. So that's why the king on h8 is relatively safe. Exactly. There is no good way for white to attack our king. That's why every time when we decide to advance the pawns from our king to attack the enemy king, we have to consider whether your opponent whether our opponent has a chance to take advantage of our king, or these are some overall rules that you learned when you were a kid. And someone strong told you, don't expose your king. So if you attended my previous webinars and workshops, or if you attended a series of group classes which was devoted to the attack and defense. So there was a series of group classes how to attack and defend in chess. And there I was telling that advancing the pawns from the king in order to attack the enemy king is possible when the center is stable. This is exact the case when the center is stable. How to open the position there to obtain the counterplay? This move, okay, fine, then this move, but just bishop takes, and nothing seriously changed with the pawn structure. Oh, okay, so there is a rook lift like that, 3 tempi. Okay, fine. Yes, I think it's possible. Yeah, a rook lift and then g takes f4. I don't know which rook lift. Maybe this even can be a rook lift. But I would prefer having the queen on g3, of course. Okay, anyway, the game continued with queen d2, and now g takes e4, e takes e4 means that the queen comes there, taking h3. How should they play? King h1, but then rook g3, and then rook g8, and you are ready to sacrifice your rook there and win the game. Maybe they can play something, so this sacrifice won't work. Actually, I don't see how. So, for example, bishop b5 to... Well, it's losing. It's simply losing because you can do e3, right? So queen e2, because if it's queen d3 or queen d4, you just take there and then checkmate. So it should be the queen on the second rank, and then you can still do the same thing. You can try this. They have to take. You play d4 check. No. Wait. You do this move, they block, and then you play d4 check. And after king g1, this leads to checkmate. That's why they took with a rook. Taking with the pawn would allow us to activate our bishop. Queen g5, attacking, bishop f1, queen goes to g3, king goes to h1, and queen g7 back, attacking here. Queen d4. This is a weakness too. So g2 is a weakness and d5 is a weakness. Bishop a6, because our bishop is not doing much. Their bishop is defending the pawn on g2. Let's trade them. So we are threatening to take on g2. Once we trade bishops, we're threatening to take on g2. That's why rook f2. Queen g3 attacking it. Rook goes to c2 to be able to still protect on g2. Bishop f1, rook f1, and rook c8. So we succeeded with the kingside play, tying enemy pieces down to the g2. e3 and e5 are both weaknesses, and now we are trying to activate our pieces. Rook c4, rook a4 is the plan, so they have to play this move, and this is where we come up with the second stage of our plan. It's rook c7. This move is a multifunctional move. It allows us to play this and add more pressure, or this and add pressure there. For example, just, well, how to play. So they just played rook e2 move. The game continued with rook c g7 and rook f4. After which, why black understood that they were stuck with the kingside play, so they simply transferred their rooks back. Okay, there is also a suggestion. There is also a suggestion of transferring the rook there. I don't think it works. So let's say you do it. I spend a few tempi on something, for example, like that. Then what? You take... Oh, it does work because of the back rank. Right. But if, let's say, here they just move the queen back, instead of a5, they move the queen back, then it fails. Well, you can try rook h6, but if you see that then the queen goes back, you have to change your strategy and maybe focus on the attack of the pawn on c3. Okay, why earlier in the game they didn't trade queens when the queen came to g3? How do you trade queens? Well, if you move the queen, it's queen e5. Well, first of all, it's bishop f1, rook f1. And then it's queen e5. You cannot trade queens, you lose a pawn then. And after that, any endgame is almost winning for black. So rook c7 was played. This is the second object of the attack. Rook goes there, they repeated the position and played rook g6. Rook h6. So the queen went to b4. That wasn't a good move, actually. That was actually a blunder. What they could do is just bringing the queen there. And if so, the game would continue with rook h6, but to be honest, the attack is stuck. And instead, after rook a1, you would have to bring your pieces to the other side and try to create a weakness on that on the queen side with your pieces. So it's not a winning position. But after queen b4, it is. And mainly because the queen doesn't retreat to the back rank. Rook h6. Rook h3 now is a threat. G takes, queen g1 mate. Bringing the rook there can be a plan, but this time rook h3, pawn takes, queen takes, and rook h2 fails. This rook is just hanging. That's why they played h4. But h4 already means that black is winning. Black can simply capture on h4, for example, win a piece, or win a pawn, sorry. In the game, they continued with this move. Why? To take this pawn or to capture on h4 with a rook and keep queens on the board. I don't know why c4 was played. Maybe with the idea of queen e1 or so. But let's say they continue with this move. What would you do? Well, queen e7 is interesting. I would agree. Probably g3 is a blunder. Yeah, queen e7 works. Rook, okay. Well, queen e7 works. The next move, queen g3 is suggested too. Then you take with a rook, that's right. What else? What about this move? How do they defend? Queen d2 loses the pawn on e5. Rook f2 loses the pawn on h4. But queen e7 is enough. So c4 was played, rook g6, and then rook g3. He took on g2. Well, what move to play, actually? Rook g3, well, and they don't know what to do. It seems that the position is lost. Queen can capture. For example, c takes d5 would lead to a tactical strike that probably you need to calculate first. What do you think? Which tactical strike I'm talking about? I think that Alexander Alekhine calculated it well, and that's the reason why he played it. Why he preferred this line instead of rook g4 or queen e7. I'm not sure if you can calculate it, but maybe you can just by intuition suggest, yes, thanks. And it's rook h3. Well, rook h3, if they take, it's game over. We don't need to talk about it. The problem is that they make this move and then queen g3 coming. And queen h2 and so on. Queen h2, king cannot go to f2, g2 is lost. He has to go there, but then it's a check on h1 and then g2 is lost anyway. Let me make a few more moves to illustrate it. This is the best defense. The king escapes to e2. Here, attack through the other side. Maybe they take the pawn because I didn't find anything else. Then rook e3, a tricky move. After queen e3, there is a check on h1 and there is a check on c2, which forces them to block with a queen. Now it means that if we trade, they have still two rooks and two passed pawns. But we don't trade immediately, we play this move first. And this move allows us to stop everything. For example, queen c2, king e1, and after that, e3. Threatening with checkmate. Doesn't matter whether, well, it does matter. For example, e7, this king f1, we don't take. If the king was on f3, we would take, but here just queen d1, checkmate. If rook f1, then just check, he goes there, and this is over. We can just play this move and promote to a second queen, and then we checkmate by capturing the rook with one of the queens, doesn't matter which. So this line with rook h3, with rook h3 was his main threat. The game continued with queen e1, and after rook g2 it was over. It's a checkmate in 2 moves. Okay, fine. So what did happen in this game? f4 was played, and because of the character of the position, it was closed, the center was closed. It indicated us that we can execute an attack on the king side with g5. The enemy pieces are not prepared for that. However, we can just play king h8, rook g8, and try to attack g2 with our rooks. Even tripling on the G file is a good strategy. It's not a winning position, it's just slightly better for black, like approximately equal. But this plan, when you understand what you should be doing, but your opponent has to come up with defensive moves, it's really hard to play for chess players under 2000. They are likely to make mistakes when they have to defend. It's quite hard to find the only defensive moves, having several threats in a row. The second mistake that I would say was making this pawn a weakness. So capturing with a rook was a must, actually, but e5 is a weakness. This is what white would better anticipate before placing their knight on e5. But at the same time, where else they can move? Well, maybe in this position, they'd better just prepare. The king, for example, can go there, and they could bring their queen, and this is how they would stop our attack, because their queen was preventing us from coming to h4. Queen h4, queen e1, like that. And then we either have to trade, after which we no longer have an attack on the king, or we have to retreat back and then keep playing positionally. That was the best. Okay. Yes, this is a reasonable question. So what Dan suggests, when one player may execute a kingside attack in case if he has advantage. I mean, this attack is likely to be successful if he has a material advantage on that side of the board, which is more than 5 pawns, so a rook or more, which is absolutely true. So it can be a rook, it can be 2 minor pieces, but it's not only about having having a material majority at the moment. It's about ability of bringing these pieces quicker to the attack. So we can bring the rook to the attack, the queen, quite quick, and then open the position. But these pieces are really defending the position? In one line, yes. If, for example, it was this scenario, then the queen was able to defend the king. But here, it looks like the knight doesn't really do any defensive functions. The bishop, well, the bishop can go to f1 only. And we can get our pieces, the rook and the queen, quite faster. So actually, we are attacking with queen, rook, versus rook and bishop, and several pawns. That's why we already have an advantage of 5 pawns or more. So queen, and queen versus bishop, it's +6 or more even than +6, because the queen is considered to be 9 pawns, but if it's the queen into the attack, it's much more. So it's not only about the presence of your pieces on the king side, it's about the ability to bring these pieces to the king side too. Okay, fine. We have one more example. However, before we proceed, let me remind you that if you enjoy the content that I create, you can always support me by sending a donation using this PayPal button. Let me copy the link to you and explain how it works for those who attend the workshop for the first time. My workshops are free, but if you have this possibility to donate, I would really appreciate it. It helps me to prepare content in advance. So you just click the button, enter the amount you want to donate, then it redirects you to, well, you click this, it redirects you to PayPal. You have to enter to your PayPal account and deliver, and then your money are automatically delivered to my PayPal account. This also helps me to pay for my assistant's job. So because I have 2 people helping me, one of is a FIDE master, the other one is not a chess player. She's responsible for doing announcements and sending emails to you. The other option is to send the transfer through Wise. If you don't have PayPal but you have Wise, it works too. So here you just use this link and enter. Here you click enter. I'm sorry, it's in Russian because my account in Wise is in Russian. However, it's not a Russian-based account. I also have a residentship of Kazakhstan and Argentina. So yeah, this is the link. Let me copy this link to the chat. Also, what else I want you to remember, that we are done with the series of group classes, and our next group class starts on September 19th. I will send an announcement a little later. Most likely I will already share it with you on our next workshop on Sunday. I hope so. This new series will be devoted to the game planning. So how to come up the plan, what possible plans you can find, how you can decide which plan to follow in this or that position, which are these indicators that tell you that this plan works and the other one probably not. So this is what we are going to talk about, and these group lessons are relatively cheap. So it's like $10 per hour or something. It's once a week on Fridays. Okay, fine. Our next example. What do you think about this position? And what would you play if you were white? Okay, so, well, I'm talking for white. Sacrifice the bishop. On e5, you mean? Bishop g6. Yes, bishop g6 looks like a plan. Right now, I don't think it is reasonable. Well, bishop g6, yeah, definitely sounds like a plan. We can sacrifice the bishop for 3 pawns. But we'd better wait for a better moment of doing it. When you have the bishop on g3, which attacks c5, but you see that you cannot take it, it does make sense to undermine the pawn on d6 by doing c5. Now, if they take, we just take on e5. With which piece is better? Doesn't matter. Even with a pawn is okay, because we restrict enemy pieces. Okay, so e takes d4 was played. C takes d6 with a temper, and we are threatening to trap the rook. That's why the knight on c3 is not cannot be captured. Bishop takes, and e takes d4. What did happen in the game? If, for example, they decided to play this move, which didn't happen, then bishop d6, knight d6, and bishop g6 works, because this time there is no knight g7, and that's why your attack looks stronger. There is even no knight h7 because of queen d6. So what they have to do is to repeat the position. But then you play knight e5, and this is an easy attack. Here, for a bishop that you sacrificed, you have 3 pawns as a compensation, but it seems that once you do a rook lift, the position is almost winning. You don't have to prove it, because 3 pawns are already sufficient for the bishop in this position when the king is weak. So you can just attack slowly. There is no need to rush. But this move wasn't played. Instead, they took. And this is where Lev Polugaevsky, who was playing with white pieces, suddenly took with the f pawn, which we typically don't do because it weakens this diagonal, because we'd better prefer capturing to the center to control better squares. But this time, he thought that having the control of the f file allows him to play for a win. And that's true. Knight g7. Yeah, he wanted to activate the rook. Rook goes there. There are 2 files open. So, and f7 is a backward pawn. The queen wants to go to the center, so queen d8. Queen d2 attacking there. King h7 is a must. And even here, white aims to attack on the king side. So he wants to do this move. Knight f5 was played, but after rook f4, it seems this knight has to move, or they have to defend it with the bishop. So knight f6. But then it's g4. And if g5, it's bishop f5 or rook f5. That's why this knight has to retreat. Now let's decide what should we do to continue with our original plan. Look, with this maneuver, it seems that we successfully doubled the rooks. It's quite weird, and I see it for the first time. I mean, for the second time. The first one was when I prepared this game for you. I mean, this is the first game I see it. Okay, knight g5. Knight g5 is a check, and after pawn takes g5, it's rook f6. This does make sense. Yeah, I agree. But is it really winning? If this move, for example, bishop g6 works well, so it's possible. But do we really need knight g5 and this sacrifice? If instead we can play knight e5 and do the same thing without any sacrifices. So knight e5. They have to defend. Well, how? If this move, then queen f2, and they lose there. Even just a simple move, king h1 doesn't make sense. Okay, queen f2 looks good. They played with this knight. Queen f2, bishop e6, defending f7. Could you take on f7 right away? Well, technically yes. But then d4 is a weakness. However, I still think it's a winning position. This. d4 is hanging, g4 is hanging, but it's queen f4 just. And you have a decisive attack. In the game, it was queen f2 played. Maybe not obligatory. The other thing that you could already try was knight g6. And if I were playing, I would already play knight g6, because then I have a discovered attack. But if they take, I win exchange, and well, I have a lot of threats. So this is my plan, but I cannot do it right away. So maybe just bringing the queen to f4 or to e3 would make sense here. But Pologoyevsky didn't want black to improve their pieces, so he brought his knight to e4 to trade this knight to weaken the f7. Take, take. Everything is protected. Knight goes to g7. And finally, he delivers a decisive tactical strike. What do you think? What was that tactical strike? No, this is a simple question. It's the same move that we discussed before. It's knight g6. The f pawn is pinned. And because there is a discovered attack with this knight, they decided to sacrifice the exchange, and this endgame is completely winning. Bishop takes a2, but the b7 or the a7 pawn is lost, or the c6, like it was in this case, and then just d5, the pawn is promoted. They have to sacrifice their bishop for such a pawn. And that's why the game was over. So again, let's take a look at this critical moment of the game, where the bishops were traded. Otherwise, if not, if for example this move, there would be a bishop straight and a bishop captures on g6, and there is no knight g7, and if there is no knight g7, then the attack becomes really strong. So that's why they took first, and that provoked us opening the f file, after which we could occupy e5 and add enough pressure. Also, look at this maneuver, rook e4, which at the same time creates a threat of rook h4, attacking h6, because this is a weak pawn, and doing this means to weaken the g5. How it can be protected? Only g4, only with h5, but then you can either try this or knight g5, for example, then take on f7. So the knight went to e5, and after that the position was already winning. They cannot save this knight. They can try this move, but then again queen f2, and it's totally lost. So this move then add pressure. And once they take, I think rook f7 already works. Yeah, rook f7 already works. And if they don't do anything, then you take here. Yeah, how does rook f7 works? Let me show you. Like that, with checkmate. This is how the game would end in case if they would try to keep the knight on f6, blocking our attack on the f file. So that was the biggest issue, opening the file and trying to attack the weaknesses. So what you should remember, that you should open the files when you see that your pieces are better coordinated, or your pieces can be better coordinated, and you can initiate a very aggressive play on that file, which forces your opponent to tie his pieces down to such a weakness. It can be an attack on the king, but not obligatory. And what else you have to remember is that you may create the second target, the object of the attack on the other side, like it was here when Black realized that he is stuck with the king side, so he moved his pieces to the queen side, captured there, and promoted the pawn. Okay, fine. So this is what our workshop today was about. So thank you for coming and attending it. Do you have any suggestions, any questions? Okay, good point. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for letting me know. Let me just, yes, so let me just show you what I have. So I'm sure you can see the screen. So on the chess world, here you should click store. And then you should, to find my courses, you just need to here in search, sorry, it's a bit slow. I actually have no ideas why. And here you can type my name. Why is it so slow? Okay, so to find my courses, you can just type my name and there will be a list of them. Yeah, a lot of them. So, and some of them are on sale. As for Chessable, I don't know which exact courses are going to be on sale. But again, it depends on what you need. I have several opening courses. The one that I recommend is Evaluate Before You Calculate, as well as the one devoted to tactical vision. Yeah, you'll see. And there is also one small inside. One small insight. Well, here in the list of my courses, you see there is the Spicy Italian Game. This is the one which is not released yet. The release will be on the 12th of September. So the courses I'm saying is this: Evaluate Before You Calculate. It helps you to calculate better, as well as it shows the algorithm of how to evaluate the position. And the other one I suggest should be here. Train your tactical vision. So the second one. These are my best courses. But again, I have two opening courses. Khan Sicilian course. Now I have demolished the London system for black, and the Khan Sicilian course, which is here, the victorious Khan Sicilian. So, well, they will be on sale. Some of them will be on sale tomorrow. So if you want, you can join and find them. Perfect. Is there anything else you want to share? The sale on Chessable is for the publisher. I am a publisher, I think. So I think that my course will be on sale. Okay, thank you for coming. Peter, you have this question, but let me answer it privately, okay? So can you please send this question to WhatsApp? I can answer a little later, fine? Okay, thank you for coming and see you next Sunday at our next class.